What would you do if you found a woman on the side of the road, her face swollen and bruised, her eyes holding more fear than any creature should bear? Would you keep riding? Would you tell yourself it wasn't your business? I'd spent 3 years telling myself that nothing was my business anymore. Not since Margaret died. Not since I buried my heart in the cold Oklahoma dirt beside her. But the moment I saw that girl, broken, bleeding, abandoned like something worthless, every wall I'd built came crashing down. Let me tell you how a stranger's suffering became the only thing that could make me feel alive again. The spring of 1895 had been cruel to the Oklahoma Territory. Drought had turned the land to dust, and desperation had turned good men into something else entirely. I'd seen it in the eyes of my neighbors, that hollow look of people watching their dreams die slow. I knew that look well. I saw it every morning in my own reflection when I forced myself to shave, to eat, to pretend I had any reason to keep breathing. My name is Elijah Crane, and I own 160 acres of farmland, about 20 miles west of what they call Guthrie now. Before Margaret passed, those acres meant everything to me. We'd built our dreams into that soil, planted our hopes alongside the wheat and corn. After she was gone, they became nothing more than a prison. A place where every corner, every room, every damn sunset reminded me of what I'd lost. The bed we'd shared, the kitchen where she'd hummed while making breakfast. The porch where we'd sat together watching storms roll across the prairie. That morning, I was riding into town for supplies I didn't really need. The truth was, I couldn't stand the silence of my empty farmhouse anymore. The walls seemed to close in tighter every day, and even my own thoughts had become enemies. I'd find myself standing in the middle of a room forgetting what I'd come for, forgetting why I bothered to get up at all. Some mornings, the only thing that got me out of bed was the horses needing to be fed. Animals don't care if your heart is broken. They still need water and grain. The road to town was familiar as my own heartbeat. I'd ridden it 1,000 times, knew every rut and rise, every place where the wildflowers bloomed in spring. I wasn't really seeing it that morning. My mind was somewhere else, probably back in that empty farmhouse, or 3 years in the past, holding Margaret's hand as she slipped away from me despite every prayer I'd ever learned. I saw her about 3 miles out from my property. At first, I thought it was a bundle of rags someone had tossed by the roadside. The territory had become lawless in places, and people abandoned all manner of things when they fled. Then the bundle moved. I pulled my horse to a stop, my hand instinctively going to the rifle at my saddle. These were dangerous times. Outlaws used all manner of tricks to ambush travelers. I'd heard stories of men stopping to help what looked like stranded women, only to find themselves surrounded by bandits. My grip tightened on the rifle stock as I squinted against the morning sun. But as I got closer, I realized this was no trick. This was something far worse. She was trying to crawl. Her dress, once white, was now brown with dirt and dark with something else. Blood. I could see it seeping through the fabric at her shoulder, dried in streaks down her back. Her arms gave out, and she collapsed face first into the dust, a small cry escaping her cracked lips. It was the sound a wounded animal makes, a sound of pure suffering, beyond pride, beyond hope. I dismounted before I could think better of it. "Easy now," I said, my voice rough from disuse. I hadn't spoken to another soul in 3 days, hadn't had a proper conversation in weeks. "Easy." She flinched at the sound of my voice, curling into herself like a wounded animal expecting another blow. That movement, that instinctive fear, it did something to me, cracked something open in my chest that I'd thought was dead and buried alongside Margaret. I crouched down, keeping my distance, trying to make my massive frame seem less threatening. I knew what I looked like. 6'5" of muscle and scowl, with hands like dinner plates and shoulders broad enough to block a doorway. My face wasn't much better. Hard lines, a jaw that hadn't seen a proper shave in a week, eyes that had forgotten how to soften. Margaret used to say I had the body of a bear and the heart of a lamb. Without her, I wasn't sure the lamb part existed anymore. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, softer this time. "Can you tell me your name?" She lifted her head and I saw her face for the first time. My stomach turned so violently I nearly lost my breakfast. Someone had beaten her. Recently and thoroughly. Her left eye was swollen completely shut. a deep purple bruise spreading across her cheekbone and up toward her temple. Her lip was split in 2 places. Dried blood crusted at the corners of her mouth. There was a gash on her forehead, barely scabbed over, and what looked like the imprint of a ring on her cheek. Someone had hit her while wearing jewelry. But it was the right eye, the one she could still open, that gutted me. It was the palest blue I'd ever seen, like a winter sky just before dawn. And it held no hope. None at all. Just a vast, empty exhaustion, the look of someone who had stopped believing the world could offer anything but pain. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, don't take me back." Take her back? Back to whoever had done this to her? The thought made my blood run cold, and then hot with a fury I hadn't felt in years. "I'm not taking you anywhere you don't want to go," I said, struggling to keep my voice level. "But I can't leave you here. You'll die." She laughed at that, a horrible, broken sound that held no humor. Maybe that would be better. Something inside me snapped. I'd spent 3 years numb, going through the motions of living while feeling nothing at all. The numbness had been a blessing, a way to survive the unsurvivable. But her words, that resignation, that acceptance of death as mercy, it woke a rage in me I'd forgotten I possessed, not at her, at whoever had brought her to this point, at a world that could break someone so completely. "No," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "That's not how this ends. Can you stand?" she tried. God help her, she tried. I watched her thin arms shake as she pushed against the dirt, watched her face contort with pain as she attempted to rise. But her legs buckled before she'd risen an inch, and she crumpled back to the ground with a sob that cut right through me. Without thinking, I scooped her up into my arms. She weighed nothing, less than nothing. A grown woman, and I could count her ribs through her dress, could feel the sharp angles of her shoulder blades against my forearm. When had she last eaten? When had anyone cared enough to feed her? She went rigid against me, her small hands pressing against my chest as if to push me away. But there was no strength in her, none at all. Just that instinctive resistance, that fear of being touched by someone larger and stronger. "I'm taking you to my farm," I said, keeping my voice low and even. "You'll be safe there. No one will hurt you. I swear it on my life." She stared up at me with that one pale eye, searching for something. Deception, maybe. Or cruelty. She was looking for the monster she expected all men to be, the trap hidden behind my words of comfort. Whatever she was looking for, she must not have found it, because after a long moment, she went limp in my arms. Not unconscious. I could see her breathing, see the slight flutter of her pulse at her throat. Just surrendered. Given up. Too exhausted to fight anymore. I lifted her onto my horse, then mounted behind her, holding her steady with one arm while I guided the reins with the other. She felt like a bird in my grasp. Fragile. Breakable. I found myself adjusting my grip constantly, terrified of holding too tight, of adding any more pain to what she'd already endured. "What's your name?" I asked again as we rode. The motion of the horse seemed to rouse her slightly, her head lifting from where it had fallen against my chest. For a long moment I thought she wouldn't answer. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe speech was beyond her. "Clara," she finally said, her voice scratchy and raw. "Clara Whitmore. I'm Elijah Crane." I paused, unsure what else to say. I'd forgotten how to make conversation with another human being, forgotten the rhythms of normal interaction. "The farm's not far. 20 minutes, maybe. You can rest soon." She didn't respond. Just sat there in my arms, trembling despite the warmth of the day. I pulled her closer, trying to shield her from the wind, trying to offer what little comfort I could. She stiffened again at the contact, then slowly, almost imperceptibly, relaxed against my chest. We didn't speak for the rest of the ride. But somewhere in that silence, something shifted. I'd been dead inside for 3 years, and I'd been comfortable with that death. It was easier to feel nothing than to risk feeling again. But this woman, this broken, beaten stranger, had cracked something open in me, and I wasn't sure I could close it again. When we reached the farmhouse, I carried her inside and laid her on the bed in the spare room. The room I'd been avoiding for 3 years, because it was supposed to be for children. Children that Margaret and I had talked about with such hope, had planned for with such joy. Children that would never exist now. Clara's eye had closed. She'd passed out somewhere along the way, her body finally surrendering to the exhaustion and pain she'd been fighting. I stood there looking at her, this broken stranger in my home, and felt the first genuine emotion I'd experienced since Margaret's funeral. Fury. Someone had done this to her. Someone had taken their fists to her face, had beaten her until she crawled along a dusty road praying for death. And I intended to find out who. But first, she needed care. I'd seen enough injuries in my time. From farming accidents, from the war, from bar fights in my younger and stupider years. To know she needed cleaning up and rest more than anything else. The bruises would heal, the split lip would mend. It was the damage I couldn't see that worried me. The bruises on her soul, the fear in her eyes, the way she'd accepted death as something preferable to life. I fetched water from the well, heated it on the stove, and gathered clean cloths. My movements felt clumsy after so long, without purpose. When had I last cared for another person? When had I last had a reason to heat water or prepare bandages? When I returned to the room, she was awake, watching me with that winter sky eye. There was fear in her gaze, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe, or caution. She was assessing me, trying to determine what kind of threat I posed. "I need to clean your wounds," I said, keeping my voice low. "The cuts could get infected. May I?" She nodded, just once, but didn't speak. Her hands clenched in the sheets, white-knuckled with tension. I pulled a chair beside the bed, dipped a cloth in the warm water, and began to dab at the dried blood on her lip. She winced, but didn't pull away. Up close, I could see the damage was worse than I'd thought. Her jaw was swelling too, and there were finger-shaped bruises around her throat. Someone had tried to choke her. I felt my own hands shake with the effort of remaining gentle. "Who did this to you?" The question came out rougher than I intended, more demand than request. Her good eye filled with tears, but she blinked them back, refused to let them fall. Even now, even beaten and broken, she had pride. "My family." "Your family?" "My father. My brothers." She swallowed hard, the movement making her wince as it pulled at the bruises on her throat. "I'm the youngest of 7, the only girl. When my mother died, I became useful for the cooking, the cleaning, the—" She trailed off, her voice breaking. I waited, forcing myself to keep cleaning her wounds, to keep my hands gentle when every instinct screamed at me to ride to wherever these men lived and show them what it felt like to be beaten by someone bigger and stronger. "They drank," she continued, her voice barely a whisper. "They always drank. Pa started after Ma died, and my brothers followed. And when they drank, they got mean. At first it was just words, calling me useless, telling me I was nothing. Then it was shoves, then fists." She paused, and I saw her jaw tighten. "I learned to stay quiet, to stay out of the way, to make myself small. If I was quiet enough, invisible enough, sometimes they'd forget I was there. I looked at her, this tiny woman who'd made herself even smaller to survive, who'd learned to take up no space, to have no voice, just to avoid more pain. But yesterday was different." Her voice hardened, taking on an edge of defiance. "My father said he'd found a man who wanted to marry me. A man 3 times my age, with 3 dead wives already. He'd pay good money for a young bride," Pa said. "Fresh, healthy, able to give him sons." My stomach turned. "Marry you? You mean sell you?" "Same thing, where I come from." She met my eye, and I saw something flicker there. Not hope, not yet, but something close to defiance, to anger. I said no. First time in my life I said no to anything, and they showed me what happens when I say no. I set down the cloth, my hands trembling with rage. All 5 of them? And Pa, he was the worst. Said I needed to learn my place. Said I was nothing but property to be traded when it suited them. Said I should be grateful anyone wanted me at all. "How did you get away?" A ghost of a smile crossed her battered face. "They passed out. drank themselves stupid, celebrating the money they'd be getting. I waited until I was sure they were all unconscious. Then I took the kitchen knife. Imji paused. I thought about using it. God help me, I thought about slitting every one of their throats while they slept. Why didn't you? Because then I'd be just like them. She looked at me, and the exhaustion in her eye was mixed with something else, resolution. So I ran, in the middle of the night, barefoot, with nothing but the clothes on my back. I just ran. I didn't know where I was going, didn't care. I just knew I'd rather die in the wilderness than go back to that house. How far did you get before you collapsed? I don't know. I walked all night. When the sun came up, I just kept walking. My feet were bleeding. I was so thirsty, but I kept going. She closed her eye for a moment. And then I couldn't anymore. I fell down, and I couldn't get back up. I thought that was it. I thought I was going to die right there in the dirt, and part of me was relieved. And then I found you. And then you found me. She opened her eye again, looking at me with that mixture of fear and curiosity. And now you've brought me here, to another man's house. Another stranger who could do anything he wanted to me and no one would care. No one would even know. There was a challenge in her words. A test. She was waiting to see what kind of man I was. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. For the kindness to reveal itself as a trap. I'm not going to hurt you, Clara. That's what they all say. Maybe so, but I mean it. I set down the cloth and leaned back in my chair, putting some distance between us. Showing her that I wasn't going to crowd her, wasn't going to use my size to intimidate. You're safe here. Stay as long as you need. When you're healed, if you want to leave, I'll give you money and provisions, point you wherever you want to go, no obligations, no price. She stared at me for a long moment, her pale eye searching mine, looking for the lie, looking for the catch. Why would you do that for a stranger? It was a fair question. One I didn't entirely know the answer to myself. Because I know what it's like to be broken, I heard myself say. The words came from somewhere deep, somewhere I hadn't let myself go in years. Because my wife died 3 years ago and I've been walking around like a ghost ever since. Because you're the first person in longer than I can remember who's made me feel anything at all. I shook my head, suddenly uncomfortable with how much I'd revealed. Because it's the right thing to do, take your pick. She was quiet for so long I thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, so softly I almost missed it. Thank you. 2 words, just 2 small words, but they settled into my chest like seeds in soil, like something that might, against all odds, grow. Get some rest, I said, rising from the chair. I'll bring you some broth later. You need to eat. I was almost to the door when her voice stopped me. Elijah? I turned back. She'd pushed herself up slightly, her dark hair falling around her battered face. She looked so young, so fragile, and yet there was steel in her eye, a survivor's strength that her family hadn't managed to beat out of her. I'm sorry about your wife. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak, and closed the door behind me. That night, I sat on the porch with a glass of whiskey I didn't drink, watching the stars wheel overhead and wondering what the hell I was doing. 3 years of carefully constructed numbness, and one broken girl had dismantled it in an afternoon. I could feel things again. Worry, anger, something that might have been tenderness. And I wasn't sure I wanted to. Feeling meant pain. I'd learned that lesson well enough when Margaret died. But as I sat there in the darkness, listening to the wind whisper through the grass and thinking about the woman sleeping in my spare room, I realized something else. Feeling also meant being alive. And maybe, after 3 years of being dead inside, that wasn't the worst thing in the world. The days that followed were strange, awkward. Neither of us quite knew what to do with the other. Clara's bruises began to fade, the angry purple mellowing to green and yellow. Her split lip healed. The swelling in her jaw went down. But the wariness in her eye, that took longer to diminish. Every sudden movement made her flinch. Every raised voice, even my own calling to the horses, sent her retreating into corners. Every time I moved too fast or spoke too loud, I saw her brace herself for a blow that never came. I learned to move slowly around her, to announce myself before entering rooms, to keep my voice low and my hands visible. I'd never thought much about how I moved through the world before. When you're my size, people get out of your way. But now I found myself conscious of every gesture, every footstep, making myself smaller, softer, less threatening. It felt like gentling a wild horse, except Clara wasn't wild, she'd been broken. And breaking was a different thing entirely. A wild horse fears you because it doesn't know you. A broken one fears you because it knows exactly what humans are capable of. She tried to work those first few days, insisted on it, despite barely being able to stand. I'd find her in the kitchen, attempting to cook with hands that still shook, or on her knees, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, or outside, trying to hang laundry on the line, her arms trembling with the effort of lifting the wet sheets. "You don't need to do that," I told her after finding her elbow deep in laundry on the third morning. "You're a guest, not a servant." "A guest pays for her keep," she said without looking up. Her hands kept moving, wringing water from a shirt. "This is all I know how to do. Your keep is paid. I told you, no obligations." She did look up then, that pale eye narrowing with something that might have been frustration, or might have been fear. "Then what am I supposed to do? Sit around and watch you work? I'm not an invalid. You nearly died 3 days ago." "I've had worse." The matter-of-fact way she said it made my chest ache. What kind of life had she lived, that a beating severe enough to leave her crawling on a roadside wasn't the worst she'd experienced? What horrors had she survived that made this seem almost routine? "Fine," I said, because I could see the need in her. The need to be useful, to have purpose, to prove her worth. She'd spent her whole life being told she was only valuable for what she could do. Taking that away from her now, even with good intentions, would only make her feel more lost. But nothing too strenuous. Light cleaning. Cooking if you want, but only if you rest when you're tired. And you eat everything I put in front of you. You're too thin." A ghost of a smile flickered across her face. It was gone almost before I saw it, but it transformed her features completely. Made me see past the fading bruises to the woman beneath. "Are you always this bossy?" she asked. "Only when people are too stubborn to take care of themselves." The smile grew, just a fraction. My mother used to say the same thing. It was the first time she'd mentioned her mother with anything other than grief. I counted it as progress. "Then your mother was a wise woman." She was. Clara looked down at the laundry in her hands, and I saw her throat move as she swallowed. "She died when I was 12, after that. Everything changed." I wanted to ask more, wanted to know everything about her, her mother, her childhood, the girl she'd been before the world broke her. But I'd pushed enough for one morning. "I'll be in the fields if you need anything," I said. "Just call out. I'll hear you." I turned to go, but her voice stopped me. "Elijah?" I looked back. She was watching me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Gratitude, maybe. Or wonder. Or something in between. "Thank you. For not making me feel useless." I nodded, not trusting my voice, and headed out to the fields. As the weeks passed, we fell into a rhythm. I worked the farm during the day, mending fences that had gone too long without repair, tending crops that had been neglected in my grief, caring for the horses and the small herd of cattle Margaret and I had built together. The work was hard, but it felt different now. Less like punishment and more like purpose. Clara kept the house in a way it hadn't been kept since Margaret died. Floors swept, meals cooked, curtains washed and rehung. She even planted a small garden by the kitchen door, coaxing vegetables from soil that had lain fallow for 3 years. I'd watch her sometimes, from the corner of my eye, as she knelt in the dirt, with her hands buried in the earth. There was peace in her face at those moments, a kind of contentment I hadn't seen in her before. We ate dinner together each evening. At first, we ate in silence, both of us too accustomed to solitude for easy conversation. The clink of forks against plates, the creak of chairs, the wind against the windows. Those were the only sounds in those early days. But slowly, tentatively, we began to talk. She told me about her childhood before her mother died and everything changed. Picnics by the creek on summer Sundays, her mother teaching her to sew, their heads bent together over fabric and thread. The way her father used to laugh before grief and whiskey hollowed him out. "He was different then," she said one evening, her voice wistful. "He used to carry me on his shoulders, used to call me his little bird. I told her about Margaret, how we'd met at a church social when I was 22 and she was 19, both of us too shy to speak to anyone else. How she'd been the first person to see through my gruff exterior to something worth loving. How losing her had felt like losing my own heartbeat. You must have loved her very much, Clara said one evening, her voice soft. I did. I stared into my coffee cup, seeing Margaret's face in the dark liquid. Her smile, the way she'd tilt her head when she was thinking. The sound of her laughter, which I could barely remember anymore. I thought I'd never feel anything again after she was gone. And now? I looked up, met Clara's pale eyes. She was watching me with something I couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or its close cousin. Longing. Now I'm not so sure. She didn't push, didn't ask what I meant, just nodded and took another bite of the pie she'd made from the apples I'd brought back from town. But I saw the way her cheeks flushed, the way her lips curved into something that might have been a smile. The first time I saw her laugh was on a sunny afternoon 3 weeks after I'd found her. One of the barn cats had gotten into the house somehow and was stalking a mouse across the kitchen floor, its movements absurdly dramatic. Its orange fur puffed up with importance. Clara had been washing dishes when she spotted it, and the laugh that escaped her was like nothing I'd heard before. It was full-throated and genuine, completely unguarded. It transformed her face, erased the shadows and the wariness and the careful control. For a moment, she was just a young woman, delighting in something silly, and I felt my heart crack open a little wider. She caught me staring and immediately sobered, the walls coming back up. "I'm sorry, that was..." "Beautiful," I said before I could stop myself. "Your laugh, it's beautiful." She stared at me, color rising in her cheeks. "No one's ever... I don't usually. You should laugh more often." She looked away, but I saw the smile she was trying to hide. "Maybe I will, now that I have things to laugh about." It was around the 5th week when things began to change. Or maybe they'd been changing all along, and I was just finally willing to see it. I came in from the fields one afternoon, sweat-soaked and exhausted, to find Clara standing on a chair, trying to reach the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet. The chair wobbled beneath her, one leg shorter than the others, and she gasped as it tilted. I was across the room before I could think, my hands catching her waist as she fell. She landed against my chest, her small hands gripping my shoulders for balance. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I could feel her heart racing through the thin fabric of her dress, could feel the warmth of her body pressed against mine. She smelled of lavender soap and fresh bread and something else, something that was just her. Her fingers tightened on my shoulders, not pushing away, holding on. "I've got you," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. "I've got you." She looked up at me, and something shifted in her expression. The wariness was still there, but it was joined by something else now, something that made my blood heat in ways I'd thought were dead and buried alongside Margaret. "I know," she whispered. I set her down gently, stepped back, ran a hand through my hair. My heart was pounding like I'd run a mile. "You shouldn't be climbing on chairs. You could have broken your neck." "I needed the flower. It's on the top shelf. Then ask me to get it. You were working. I didn't want to bother you." "Clara." I waited until she met my eyes. "You could never bother me. Do you understand that? Whatever you need, whenever you need it, ask. I'm here." She studied me for a long moment, as if testing the truth of my words. Looking for the lie, the catch, the strings attached. But there were no strings. There was just me. A man who'd somehow started caring about someone again after 3 years of caring about nothing at all. Finally, slowly, she nodded. "The flower. Please." I reached up and retrieved it easily, my height making the task trivial. As I handed it to her, our fingers brushed. She didn't pull away, neither did I. That night, I lay awake in my empty bed, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what I was feeling. Guilt, certainly. Margaret had been gone only 3 years. Was it too soon to feel this way about another woman? Was I betraying her memory by noticing the curve of Clara's smile, the grace of her movements, the way her laughter had started filling the hollow spaces in my home? But alongside the guilt was something else, something that felt terrifyingly like hope. And underneath both of those, a fear I couldn't quite name. What if I let myself love again, and lost again? What if the universe, having taken Margaret from me, decided to take Clara too? I didn't think I could survive it a second time. The trouble came on a Sunday morning in early August. I was in the barn, brushing down my horse, when I heard Clara scream. Not a startled yelp, but a full-throated scream of terror that turned my blood to ice and set my legs moving before my brain could catch up. I grabbed the rifle from its hook and ran. There were 3 of them in my yard. Big men, rough-looking, with the ruddy complexions of heavy drinkers. I recognized the type. The kind of men who solved their problems with fists and had never learned any other way. One had Clara by the arm, dragging her toward a wagon despite her struggles. "Let her go!" My voice came out flat, deadly calm. I raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel at the man holding her. He looked at me, sneering. "This ain't your concern, friend. We're just collecting what belongs to us. She doesn't belong to anyone." "The hell she don't! This is our sister!" Ran off in the night like a thief after everything we done for her. He shook Clara roughly, making her cry out. "Time to come home, little bird. Daddy's waiting." I felt the rage building in my chest, hot and thick as smoke. 3 years of numbness. And now I was feeling everything at once. Fury and fear, and a protective instinct so strong it nearly overwhelmed me. I said let her go. "Or what? You'll shoot? Over some worthless girl?" He laughed, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. He was looking at me properly now, at my size, at the steadiness of my hands on the rifle, at the absolute lack of mercy in my expression. "I'll do more than shoot," I said quietly. "I'll tear you apart with my bare hands and leave your bodies for the coyotes. This is your one warning. Let her go and get off my land." For a long moment, no one moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then Clara twisted in her brother's grip and drove her knee into his groin with surprising force. He doubled over with a howl, releasing her, and she ran, not to the house but to me, positioning herself behind my bulk, like a child seeking shelter from a storm. I felt her hands grip the back of my shirt, felt her pressing against me, trembling, and something primal rose up in me, something ancient and fierce, the need to protect what was mine. When had I started thinking of her as mine? I kept the rifle trained on the men as they collected their injured brother. "Don't come back," I said. "Next time, I won't warn you first." The oldest one spat in the dirt at my feet. "This ain't over. She's our property, legal and proper. We'll be back with the law. Bring the whole damn territory. My answer will be the same." They left, their wagon kicking up dust as it retreated down the road. I stood there, rifle raised until they were out of sight. Only then did I allow myself to lower my weapon. Clara was shaking. Her face had gone pale, making the long faded bruises stand out in sharp relief. I set down the rifle and turned to her, every instinct screaming to gather her into my arms. I didn't. I kept my hands at my sides, gave her the choice. "They found me," she whispered. "They found me. They won't take you, I swear it!" "You can't fight the law, Elijah. If they come back with a sheriff, if they claim I'm their property..." "You're not property. You're a human being, and you're..." I stopped myself, but not quickly enough. "I'm what?" I looked at her. This woman who'd come into my life broken and bleeding, and had somehow become the center of it. Who'd taken my dead heart and made it beat again. Who'd given me a reason to wake up in the morning for the first time in 3 years. "You're the most important person in my world," I said, "and I am not going to let anyone take you away." She stared up at me, hope and fear warring in her pale eyes. Her hands were still trembling, but she wasn't crying, wasn't falling apart. She was standing there, facing this, waiting to see what came next. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do you care so much?" I could have given her a dozen reasons. Could have talked about kindness, about compassion, about the simple rightness of protecting someone who'd been hurt. Instead, I told her the truth. Because I'm falling in love with you. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with consequence. I watched her face, waiting for the rejection I was sure would come. She was young, beautiful, and had every reason to distrust men. What possible reason would she have to love a gruff, scarred farmer old enough to know better? But Clara didn't reject me. She didn't run or flinch or look away. Instead, she stepped forward and pressed her small hand against my chest, right over my heart. I thought I would never feel safe again, she said quietly. I thought the world was nothing but pain and cruelty, and people who wanted to use me. I'd given up, Elijah. I was ready to die on that road. I'd made my peace with it. Clara, but then you found me, or I found you. And for the first time in my life, I feel like I can breathe, like I can exist without being afraid of what comes next. She looked up at me, her pale eyes luminous in the afternoon light. I don't know what love feels like. I've never had anyone love me the way you describe loving your wife. But when I look at you, when I'm near you, I feel warm, protected, like nothing bad can reach me as long as you're there. That's because nothing bad will reach you, I said, not while I'm alive. She smiled, that rare, beautiful smile. If that's love, then yes, I feel it too. I don't remember deciding to kiss her. One moment we were standing there, her hand on my chest, my heart pounding beneath her palm. The next, my mouth was on hers, soft and tentative, asking a question I didn't have words for. She answered by rising on her toes and pressing closer. The kiss deepened. My arms came around her, cradling her against me, careful even now to be gentle. She felt so small in my embrace, so fragile. But there was nothing fragile about the way she kissed me back. It was fierce and desperate and full of everything she'd been too afraid to say. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. Clara's cheeks were flushed, her lips slightly swollen. She looked beautiful. She looked alive. I should have asked first, I said roughly, before kissing you, after everything you've been through. You didn't need to ask. She smiled, and it was like watching the sun break through clouds after a long winter. I've been waiting for you to do that for weeks. Despite everything, the threat of her family, the uncertainty of our future, the 1,000 obstacles standing between us and any kind of happiness, I laughed. It was a rusty sound, unused for years but genuine, the first real laugh I'd experienced since Margaret's funeral. Then I apologize for keeping you waiting. You can make it up to me. She traced a finger along my jaw, following the line of my beard, and the simple touch sent fire racing through my veins. Kiss me again. So I did. The next weeks were the happiest of my life since Margaret. Maybe, in some ways, happier. With Margaret, I'd been young and certain of the world. I'd believed that good things lasted forever, that love was enough to protect us from harm. With Clara, I was older, scarred, aware of how fragile good things could be. That awareness made me treasure every moment. We didn't rush into anything. Clara needed time to heal, not just physically, but in all the ways her family had broken her. I needed time to reconcile my feelings for her with my grief for Margaret. We took things slow, learning each other through conversations and small touches and stolen kisses that left us both breathless. We talked about everything, our childhoods, our fears, our hopes for the future. She told me about the books she'd loved as a girl, before her brothers had burned them for being a waste of time. I told her about my time in the war, the things I'd seen and done that still haunted my dreams sometimes. You're not what I expected, she said one evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. What did you expect? I don't know. She leaned her head against my shoulder, a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. Someone harder. Maybe someone more like them. I knew who she meant. Her father, her brothers, men who used their size and strength to hurt rather than protect. I've been hard, I admitted. After Margaret died, I closed myself off from everyone. My neighbors, my friends, even myself. I thought if I didn't feel anything, I couldn't be hurt. Did it work? No, I was still hurting. I just couldn't feel anything else either. No joy, no hope, no connection to anything. I turned to look at her, this woman who'd changed everything. Then you came along. And now? Now I feel everything. I took her hand, threading my fingers through hers. The good and the bad, the fear and the hope, it's terrifying, but it's also alive. You made me alive again, Clara. She squeezed my hand. You saved me first. Maybe we saved each other. She moved from the spare room to my bedroom on a night in late August, when a thunderstorm rolled across the territory and she appeared at my door, trembling. I'm scared, she admitted. I know it's just a storm, but the thunder, it sounds like… Come here! I held up the covers and she slipped in beside me. Her body pressed against mine. I wrapped my arms around her, trying to ignore the way my blood heated at her nearness. This doesn't mean… She started. I know. Just sleep. I've got you. She fell asleep like that, her head on my chest, her breath warm against my skin. I lay awake for hours, listening to the storm and the steady rhythm of her heartbeat, thinking that I would burn down the world to keep her safe. When I woke in the morning, she was still there, still curled against me, her dark hair spread across my pillow, her face peaceful in sleep. I watched her for a long time, memorizing every detail, marveling at the turns life could take. A year ago, I'd been a dead man walking. Now I had Clara. I had hope. I had a future worth fighting for. Her family came back in October. This time there were 6 of them, all 5 brothers, plus the father, a grizzled, mean-looking man with the same pale eyes as Clara, turned cold and cruel by decades of bitterness and whiskey. Clara was on the porch when they arrived. She saw them coming from a distance and had time to prepare. By the time their wagon rolled up, she was standing straight and tall, a shotgun in her hands. She looked like a warrior queen defending her castle. You're not welcome here, she said, her voice steady. Leave. That's no way to talk to your own blood, her father sneered. Put down the gun before you hurt yourself, girl. I know how to use it. Elijah taught me. Taught me a lot of things, actually. How to shoot. How to stand up for myself. How to recognize a worthless drunk when I see one. I stepped up behind her, my rifle already raised. You heard my wife! Get off our land! Wife? One of the brothers laughed. You married the little whore? She ain't worth the paper the certificate's printed on. I saw red. But before I could move, before I could do something that would end with blood and bodies, Clara fired. The blast took out the front wheel of their wagon. Horses screamed and reared. Men cursed and dove for cover. The next one goes through a person, Clara said calmly, reloading with practiced efficiency. I haven't decided who yet. Want to find out? I had never been prouder of anyone in my entire life. There was a long moment of silence. Then, slowly, the Whitmore men climbed back into their crippled wagon. This ain't over, her father spat as they prepared to leave. You're still my daughter, still my property. The law's on our side. The law's changing, Clara replied. And even if it wasn't, I'm not afraid of you anymore. I spent my whole life being afraid of you, letting you hurt me because I thought I deserved it. I know better now. She took a step forward, and the men actually flinched. I'm not your property. I'm not anyone's property. I'm Elijah Crane's wife, by choice and by love. And if you ever come here again, I'll shoot you myself. That's not a threat, Pa. It's a promise. They left. The damaged wagon limped down the road, and Clara stood on the porch, watching until they disappeared from view. Only then did she lower the shotgun. I came up behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist, pulling her back against my chest. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, I said quietly. She leaned back against me, and I felt the tension finally leaving her body. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting them have power over me. This is my home now. You're my family, and I will fight for what's mine. I turned her in my arms, tilted her face up to mine. I love you, Clara Crane. She smiled, that brilliant, transformative smile that still made my heart stutter every time I saw it. I love you too, Elijah. More than I ever thought possible. I kissed her right there on the porch, with the October wind swirling around us and the future stretching out before us. Unknown but no longer frightening. We never saw her family again. Word came, months later, that they'd gotten themselves in trouble with the wrong people, gamblers, outlaws, the sort of men who collected debts with violence. I didn't mourn them, neither did Clara. By then, we had other things to occupy our thoughts. Clara told me she was pregnant on a spring morning, her eyes bright with happy tears. She'd suspected for weeks, she said, but hadn't wanted to say anything until she was sure. "Are you sure now?" I asked, my voice strangled with hope. "The doctor confirmed it yesterday." She took my hand and pressed it to her still flat belly. "You're going to be a father, Elijah." I dropped to my knees right there in the kitchen and pressed my face against her stomach, feeling the enormity of it wash over me. A child, our child, a piece of both of us, made real. "I never thought—" My voice cracked. "After Margaret, I thought I'd never have this. I'd given up on ever being a father." "I know." Clara's fingers threaded through my hair, gentle and grounding. "But life gives us second chances sometimes. This is ours." I looked up at her, this woman who'd come into my life broken and bleeding and had somehow become my entire world. "I don't deserve you," I said. "Maybe not." She smiled, teasing. "But you've got me anyway, and you're stuck with me now." "Forever," I agreed, "for as long as I have breath in my body." Our daughter was born in December, on the coldest night of the year. Margaret Rose Crane, named for the wife I'd loved and lost, and the new life that had grown from that loss. She had Clara's pale eyes and my dark hair, and a cry that could wake the dead. She was perfect. I held her in my arms that first night, this tiny miracle, and felt my heart expand in ways I hadn't known were possible. Clara watched us from the bed, exhausted but radiant. And when our eyes met, I saw in hers the same overwhelming love that filled my own. "Thank you," I whispered to her. "For what? For this. For her. For finding me when I'd given up on ever being found." I looked down at our daughter, who had fallen asleep against my chest, and then back at Clara. "For making me feel alive again." When she reached out and took my hand, threading her fingers through mine. "You saved me first," she reminded me. "On that road, when I'd given up, you stopped, you cared, you gave me a reason to keep fighting. Then I'd say we saved each other." She smiled, that brilliant smile that still, after everything, made my breath catch. "I'd say you're right." Years later, when people asked me about my life, I'd tell them about the farm, about the land I'd worked with my own two hands, about the cattle and crops and the small community we'd helped build. I'd tell them about my daughters, 3 of them, eventually, each one more headstrong than the last, and the son who came along last, unexpected and entirely welcome. But when they asked about happiness, about what made life worth living, I'd tell them a different story. I'd tell them about a spring morning when I found a broken girl on the side of a dusty road, about how saving her life had somehow saved my own, about how love could grow in the most unlikely soil, could bloom in the aftermath of grief, could transform 2 damaged people into something whole. I'd tell them about Clara, about the way she laughed, full and free, now that there was nothing to fear, about the way she looked at our children with such fierce, protective love, about the way she still reached for my hand in the darkness, even after decades of marriage, as if reassuring herself that I was real. I'd tell them that I was a man built for solitude, for grief, for going through the motions of a life half-lived. And then a stranger stumbled into my path, and everything changed. Some people go their whole lives without ever finding their home. I found mine on a dusty road in Oklahoma, in the form of a woman with winter sky eyes and a spirit that refused to be broken. And every morning, when I wake up beside her, I thank whatever God might be listening for the day I stopped, for the day I chose to care, for the day Clara Whitmore became Clara Crane and made me whole. If this story touched your heart, leave a like. Subscribe. I have more tales of broken souls finding their way home. Until next time. There's a moment I keep coming back to, even now, even after all these years. It was about 2 weeks after I'd brought Clara home, back when she still flinched at sudden movements and spoke in that careful, measured way of someone who'd learned that words could bring pain. I'd been working in the field since dawn, repairing a section of fence that had been sagging for months. The work was mindless, physical, the kind of labor that lets your thoughts wander where they will. Ian kept wandering back to the house, to her. When I finally came in for the midday meal, I found Clara standing at the window, her back to me, her shoulders shaking. She was crying. Not the dramatic sobs you might expect, but something quieter and somehow worse. The silent tears of someone who's learned to grieve without making a sound. I stood in the doorway, uncertain. Should I leave her to her privacy? Should I speak? The old me, the numb me, would have walked away, would have told himself it wasn't his business. But I wasn't that man anymore. Clara? She startled, turning quickly, her hands coming up to wipe at her cheeks. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you come in. Let me get your lunch ready. Clara. I crossed the room slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She didn't. What's wrong? Nothing. It's nothing. I'm being foolish. Tell me. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses that had formed from weeks of work, at the faded scars I'd noticed but never asked about. I was just thinking about my mother. She used to have a garden, like the one I'm planting. She'd spend hours in it, talking to the plants like they were friends. I always thought it was silly. A tear slipped down her cheek. Now I understand. Sometimes the plants are the only ones who'll listen. I'll listen, I said. The words came out before I could stop them. If you want someone to talk to, I'm not much for conversation, I know, but I'll listen. She looked up at me, her pale eye swimming with tears. Why are you so kind to me? It was the question she kept asking, in different ways, as if she still couldn't quite believe that kindness without strings existed. Because you deserve kindness, I said simply. Because someone should have been kind to you a long time ago, and since they weren't, I figure I have some catching up to do. She stared at me for a long moment, and then, slowly, she smiled. It was a watery thing, fragile as spring ice, but it was real. Would you like to see the garden? She asked. I've been wanting to show someone. I hadn't cared about gardens since Margaret died. Hadn't cared about much of anything. But Clara was offering me something precious, a piece of herself, her hopes, her dreams, and I wasn't about to refuse. I'd like that, I said. She led me out to the small plot beside the kitchen door, where she'd been working for the past week. It was nothing much yet. Just dark soil and tiny green sprouts, the promise of vegetables to come. But she described it to me with such animation, such life, pointing out where the tomatoes would grow and where the beans would climb and where she'd plant sunflowers, because her mother had always planted sunflowers. I stood there listening to her, watching her face transform as she talked, and I felt something shift in my chest. Something that had been frozen for 3 years, beginning to thaw. This is beautiful, I said when she'd finished. She blushed. It's just a garden. No. I reached out, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. She didn't flinch, didn't pull away. It's hope. That's what gardens are. Hope planted in the soil. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, something passed between us. Something unspoken but profound. The beginning of something neither of us was ready to name. Thank you, she whispered. For listening. Always, I said, and I meant it. The days grew longer as summer approached, and Clara continued to bloom alongside her garden. The bruises had long since faded, and the fear in her eyes appeared less frequently. She'd started singing while she worked, old songs, hymns mostly, in a voice that was clear and sweet and surprisingly strong. I found myself manufacturing reasons to come inside during the day, just to hear her. Just to catch glimpses of her going about her business, comfortable in what had become her home. She'd rearranged things, small touches here and there. A jar of wildflowers on the windowsill, new curtains she'd sewn from fabric I'd bought in town, a rug beside the hearth that she'd braided from scraps. The house felt different with her in it. It felt alive in a way it hadn't since Margaret's passing. The shadows seemed less oppressive, the silence less crushing. There was warmth here now, and light, and the smell of cooking food and growing things. I hadn't realized how much I'd been missing until I had it again. One evening in early June, we sat on the porch watching fireflies dance across the fields. The air was warm and thick with the scent of honeysuckle, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird was running through its repertoire. What was she like? Clara asked suddenly. Your wife? I tensed, the familiar ache settling in my chest. I'd talked about Margaret before in fragments, but never in detail. Never the full picture of who she'd been. You don't have to answer, Clara said quickly. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. No, it's all right. I took a deep breath, let it out slowly. She was sunlight. That's the best way I can describe her. Even on the darkest days, she found something to smile about, something to hope for. How did you meet? Church social. I was 22, fresh off the farm, certain I knew everything about the world. I shook my head at the memory of my younger self. She saw right through me. First time we talked, she told me I was too proud for my own good and too stubborn to see it. Clara laughed. She sounds formidable. She was. Tiny thing, barely came up to my shoulder, but she had a spine of steel. She's the one who convinced me to buy this land, to build this house. Said she could see our whole lives here, if I just had the courage to reach for it. And did you? Reach for it? We did. Together. I stared out at the fields, at the life we'd built, and the life she'd never gotten to see complete. We had 7 years. 7 years of building and dreaming and loving. And then she got sick, and all the dreaming in the world couldn't save her. Clara's hand found mine in the darkness, her fingers intertwining with my own. She didn't say anything, didn't offer platitudes or empty comfort, just held my hand and let me feel whatever I needed to feel. We sat there for a long time, watching the fireflies, and when I finally spoke again, my voice was steadier than I'd expected. I thought I'd never feel anything again after she died. I shut down, closed off, went through the motions of living without actually being alive. I turned to look at Clara, at this woman who'd stumbled into my life and changed everything. Then you came along, and now? Now I'm remembering what it felt like to hope, to want things, to imagine a future that's more than just surviving day to day. I squeezed her hand. I don't know what comes next, Clara. I don't know where this is heading, but I know I don't want to go back to being numb. She was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was soft. I never knew what hope felt like, not really. I survived, but I never hoped. There was never any point in hoping for things that couldn't happen. What about now? She looked at me, and even in the darkness, I could see the emotion in her pale eyes. Now, I'm starting to believe that maybe some things can happen after all. We didn't kiss that night. Didn't do anything more than hold hands and watch the fireflies and talk until the stars wheeled overhead and exhaustion pulled us inside. But something had shifted between us. Some invisible barrier had fallen, and we both knew it. Later, lying alone in my bed, I thought about Margaret, about how she'd always said she wanted me to be happy no matter what, about how she'd made me promise, in those final days, that I wouldn't spend the rest of my life grieving. Find someone, she'd whispered, her hand cold and frail in mine. Promise me. Find someone who makes you laugh again. I'd promised. And then I'd broken that promise for 3 long years. Maybe it was time to start keeping it. The summer brought challenges, along with its warmth. A drought threatened the crops, and I spent long days hauling water from the creek, trying to keep the fields alive. Clara worked alongside me when she could, her small hands blistered from the bucket handles, her face flushed with heat and determination. You should rest, I told her one afternoon, concerned about the way she was swaying on her feet. So should you, she shot back, but the crops won't water themselves. I couldn't argue with that logic, so I stopped trying. We worked side by side until the sun set, and then we collapsed on the porch, too tired even to eat. Tell me about Oklahoma, she said, her head resting against my shoulder. She'd gotten comfortable with casual contact, comfortable with being close. I treasured every moment of it. Before the territory opened, what was it like? Wild, I said. Empty, beautiful in a savage kind of way. I thought back to my first years here when the land had been open range and the future had seemed limitless. Margaret and I came during the land run of '89, staked our claim alongside thousands of others, racing for a piece of something to call our own. That sounds terrifying. It was. Also exhilarating. Also stupid. I smiled at the memory. We were young and foolish and certain we were invincible. The world hadn't taught us different yet. And now? Now I know better. The world has a way of teaching hard lessons. I looked down at her, at the woman who'd learned harder lessons than most. But it also has a way of offering second chances, if you're brave enough to take them. She tilted her face up to mine, her expression thoughtful. Are you brave enough? It was a loaded question, and we both knew it. She wasn't asking about the drought or the crops or anything external. She was asking about us, about what was growing between us alongside her garden vegetables. I'm trying to be, I said honestly. After Margaret, I swore I'd never let anyone close again. Never give another person the power to destroy me by leaving. But then you showed up, all bruises and defiance, and I shook my head. You made me want to try. I'm scared, she admitted. I don't know how to do this, any of this. I've never been loved, not really. I don't know how to be loved without waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then we'll figure it out together, I said. There's no rush, no expectations, just us, learning as we go. She smiled, that rare, beautiful smile that lit up her whole face. I'd like that. Good. I pressed a kiss to her forehead, gentle and chaste. Now let's get some sleep. The crops need watering again at dawn. She laughed, and the sound was better than any music I'd ever heard. The drought broke in late July with a thunderstorm that felt like the heavens opening up. Clara and I stood on the porch, watching the rain pound the parched earth, watching our struggling crops drink their fill, and when she turned to me with tears of relief streaming down her face, I pulled her into my arms and held her tight. That was the night I knew for certain that I loved her. Not the beginning of love, not the possibility of love, but the deep, certain knowledge that this woman had become essential to my existence. I didn't tell her. Not yet. She wasn't ready to hear it, and I wasn't sure I was ready to say it. But I held that knowledge close to my heart like a candle flame, nurturing it, protecting it, letting it grow. By the time August rolled around, our relationship had deepened into something that defied easy description. We weren't courting, exactly. There had been no formal declaration, no official understanding. But we weren't just housemates either. We were something in between, something new, something neither of us had words for. I taught her to ride, those long summer evenings, sitting behind her on my horse at first, then watching as she learned to handle the animal on her own. She had natural ability, a way with horses that surprised both of us. You should have your own horse, I told her after one particularly impressive ride. I'll find you one in town. Something gentle but spirited like you. She blushed. I couldn't let you do that. It's too much. Let me decide what's too much. I helped her dismount, my hands lingering at her waist, longer than strictly necessary. You're part of this farm now, Clara. That means you need proper equipment. Am I? She looked up at me, something vulnerable in her expression. Part of the farm, I mean. You're part of everything, I said. The words came out rougher than I intended, weighted with meaning. Don't you know that by now? She didn't answer. Just rose up on her toes and pressed a kiss to my cheek. Her first voluntary initiation of physical affection since I'd brought her home. Then she turned and walked into the house, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and a grin spreading across my face. Progress, slow but certain progress. The day everything changed started like any other. I was in the north field, checking on the cattle, when I heard hoofbeats approaching, fast hoofbeats, urgent. Clara came riding up on my horse, her face white with fear. "Riders!" she gasped out. "Coming from the east! Looks like a posse!" My blood ran cold. Her family. It had to be her family, coming back with reinforcements. "Get to the house," I said, already swinging onto the horse behind her. "Get the shotgun. I taught you where everything is. Elijah. Now, Clara." We rode hard back to the farmhouse, and I saw them as soon as we crested the rise. 4 men on horseback, plus a wagon bringing up the rear. Not just her brothers this time. There were others too, men I didn't recognize. I got Clara inside, pressed the shotgun into her hands. "Stay here. Don't come out unless I call for you." "What are you going to do?" "Whatever I have to." I met them in the yard, my rifle raised, my stance wide. The same posture I'd used in the war, facing down enemies who wanted me dead. "That's close enough," I called out when they were 20 yards away. The leader, a man I recognized as Clara's oldest brother, pulled up his horse. "We don't want trouble, Crane." "Then turn around." "Can't do that! Our sister belongs to our family. The law says—" "I don't give a damn what the law says." I shifted my aim, sighting down the barrel at his chest. "Clara is my wife. Any claim your family had on her ended the day she said, 'I do.' Now get off my land before I start making good on the threat I made last time." "Your wife," another voice, older, rougher. Clara's father riding forward on a broken-down nag. He looked worse than before. Gaunt, unwashed, the mark of hard living etched into every line of his face. "You married that worthless—" "Careful." My voice went flat, deadly. "That's my wife you're talking about?" He spat in the dirt. "She's no wife. She's property. Our property. And we've got papers that say so. Papers don't mean anything out here, not anymore." I held my ground, even as more of them spread out, trying to flank me. "The territory is changing. Women aren't property. And even if they were, Clara chose to be mine. Legally, willingly. Whatever claim you think you have, it ended when she made her choice." "She doesn't get to choose," one of the brothers snarled. "She's a woman! Women don't get choices!" "This one does," the voice came from behind me. I turned, and there was Clara, standing on the porch with the shotgun raised, her face set with determination. "I choose Elijah," she said clearly. "I choose this farm. I choose to never go back to your house of cruelty and pain. I choose to be free." "You'll regret this," her father hissed. "When he gets tired of you, when he throws you out like the garbage you are, then that'll be my problem to deal with, not yours." Clara's aim didn't waver. "Now leave, before I make you leave." There was a long, tense silence. Then, slowly, the Whitmore men began to back away. They knew they were outmatched. Not in numbers, maybe, but in determination. Clara and I would die before we let them take her, and they could see it in our eyes. "This isn't over," her father said as they retreated. "Yes," Clara said quietly. "It is." We watched them ride away, and only when they were out of sight did Clara lower the shotgun. Her hands were shaking, her whole body was shaking, but she'd stood her ground. I crossed to her in 3 strides and pulled her into my arms. "You were magnificent," I said into her hair. "Absolutely magnificent." She laughed, the sound verging on hysterical. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being afraid. It means being afraid and doing it anyway. I pulled back to look at her face. "You did it anyway." She met my eyes, and something in her expression shifted. Something decisive. "Elijah?" "Yes. Kiss me, like you mean it." So I did. That kiss changed everything. It was different from our first kiss, that one had been gentle, tentative, a question being asked. This one was an answer, a declaration, a promise. When we finally broke apart, breathless and dizzy, Clara looked up at me with eyes that held no fear, only certainty. "I love you," she said. "I think I've loved you since the moment you lifted me off that road, since the first time you looked at me like I was something worth saving. You were always worth saving." I cupped her face in my hands, marveling at the softness of her skin, at the trust in her expression. "You just needed someone to remind you. And you, do you love me?" "Clara Whitmore Crane, I have loved you since the first time you smiled at that ridiculous orange cat. I have loved you through every meal you've cooked and every song you've sung and every time you've looked at me like I might be something other than a broken-down farmer running from his grief." I pressed my forehead to hers. "I love you. I will always love you, and I will spend the rest of my days proving it." She smiled, and it was like the sun coming out after a storm. "Then I suppose we'd better make this marriage a real one." I blinked. "What?" "The bedroom, Elijah." Her cheeks flushed pink, but her voice was steady. "I want to be your wife, completely, if you'll have me." My heart slammed against my ribs. "Clara, there's no rush. After everything you've been through—" "After everything I've been through, I know what I want. I want you." She took my hand and pressed it to her heart. "Feel that? My heart knows what it wants, even if my head sometimes doubts. And my heart wants you, tonight, now, forever." I searched her face for any sign of hesitation. any trace of the fear that had haunted her for so long. I found none, just love and certainty and a desire that matched my own. "Then you'll have me," I said. "For as long as you want me." She smiled. "Forever." I swept her into my arms and carried her inside, and what followed was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. She was nervous at first. I could feel it in the trembling of her hands, the quickening of her breath, but I was patient, I was gentle. I showed her with every touch, every kiss, every whispered word, that this was different, that I would never hurt her, that she was safe in my arms. And when she finally let go of her fear and surrendered to the pleasure, when she cried out my name in wonder and joy, I knew that I had finally found my way home. Afterward, she lay curled against my chest, her fingers tracing idle patterns on my skin. The moonlight streamed through the window, painting her in silver and shadow. "I didn't know it could be like that," she murmured. "I thought I'd heard stories from the women in town. They made it sound like something to be endured. It should never be endured." I pressed a kiss to her hair. "It should be cherished, celebrated, enjoyed." She laughed, a low, satisfied sound. "I definitely enjoyed it." "Good, because I plan to make sure you enjoy it often." She tilted her face up to mine, her expression suddenly serious. "Elijah." "Yes?" "Thank you. For being patient with me, for never pushing, for letting me come to you in my own time. You don't need to thank me for treating you the way you deserve to be treated." "Maybe not. But I'm going to anyway." She kissed me softly. "Thank you for saving me, in every way a person can be saved." I pulled her closer, holding her tight against my heart. "You saved me too, Clara. Don't ever forget that." We fell asleep like that, tangled together, her breath warm against my chest, and my arms wrapped around her like I'd never let go. I never did. The wedding had been a formality, a piece of paper, a few words spoken in front of a preacher. But that night was when we truly became husband and wife, when we stopped being two broken people stumbling through the darkness and became something stronger, something whole. The child came 9 months later. Margaret Rose, named for the past and the future, for grief transformed into hope. She had Clara's eyes and my stubbornness, and a cry that could shake the rafters. I held her in my arms the first time and wept. I wasn't ashamed of my tears. They were tears of joy, of gratitude, of overwhelming love for this tiny creature who was proof that beauty could come from pain, that life could spring from death, that broken things could be made new. "She's perfect," Clara whispered from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "Of course she is. Look at her mother." Clara smiled, that smile that still made my heart flip even after all these months. Flatterer. Truth-teller. I carried our daughter to the bed, settled her in Clara's arms, then climbed in beside them both. "Look at us. A family." "A family," Clara echoed, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd have one. A real one, I mean. One built on love instead of obligation." "Now you have one, and nothing will ever take it from you." "I swear it." She leaned her head against my shoulder, our daughter nestled between us, and I felt a peace settle over me that I hadn't known since Margaret died. Maybe deeper than that. Maybe deeper than I'd ever known. "I love you, Elijah Crane," Clara said softly. "I love you too, Clara Crane." And there, in that moment, with my wife beside me and my daughter in our arms, and a future stretching out before us full of possibility, I finally understood what Margaret had meant all those years ago. Second chances exist. Happiness is possible. And love, real love, can find you when you least expect it in the most unlikely places, wearing the face of a broken girl on a dusty road. All you have to do is stop. All you have to do is care. All you have to do is open your heart and let it in. If this story touched your heart, leave a like. Subscribe. I have more tales of broken souls finding their way home. Until next time.